What do you get when a group of college students, armed with big dreams and a passion for heist movies, set their sights on a rare book collection worth millions? The answer lies in the Transylvania University book heist, an ill-fated moment marked by stun guns, stolen treasures, and a getaway that unraveled in ways no one could have predicted. It's time for yet another botched caper that shook an unsuspecting campus, leaving behind a trail of mistakes, bad luck, and in the end, teenage stupidity. Trust me, this one is a ride you won't see coming. Well, you might see it coming. This is Capers and Cocktails after all. Welcome to Capers and Cocktails, a true crime podcast that doesn't take itself too seriously and gives you something to enjoy while you listen. The following content may be disturbing to some. Discretion is advised. If you're enjoying one of our themed cocktails, ensure you're of legal drinking age and have fun, but drink responsibly. Okay, let's get this right out of the way. Transylvania University is not in Transylvania, the historical region in central and northwest Romania where all the vampires live. Transylvania University is in the middle of boring America in Lexington, Kentucky, of all places. It's embarrassing how long, actually, I thought that these guys were trying to steal books from vampires. Speaking of vampires, please don't forget to like, subscribe, share, do all the things for this podcast. Please, I wasn't actually speaking of vampires at all. Anyway, that was a bad transition. Let's move on. The Lexington, Kentucky Transylvania University is one of the oldest universities in the United States and the oldest university in Kentucky. Established in 1780, Transylvania gets its name for the Latin for across the woods, a nod to its origins in the dense forests of what was once the Transylvania colony. This short-lived territory existed from 1775 to 1776 in what's now southern and western Kentucky, back when the region was still part of Virginia. They also call it Transy University, which makes me a little nervous, so we will go with TU for our shortening purposes. Originally chartered as Transylvania Seminary by the Virginia Assembly before Kentucky became a state, TU was initially located in a log cabin before moving to Lexington in 1789. By 1799, it officially became Transylvania University, expanding to include a medical school, law school, and divinity school. Throughout the 19th century, the university underwent major changes, including a devastating fire in 1829, the construction of Old Morrison under Henry Clay's supervision, and a merger with Bacone College, leading to a brief renaming as Kentucky University. The institution was later instrumental in founding the University of Kentucky and the Lexington Theological Seminary before reclaiming its original name in 1908. Today, TU is a 48-acre urban campus divided by North Broadway, with academic buildings on one side and dorms on the other. There are just over 1,000 students at the private university, but it does have one heck of a library. If you ever find yourself wandering through Transylvania University's main library, you're stepping into a space with a history as rich as the books it holds. Originally completed in 1952, the library was dedicated by none other than President Dwight D. Eisenhower. Fast forward to 1985, and after a major renovation and expansion, it got a second grand opening, this time with Vice President, later to be President, George H.W. Bush, rededicating it. But it's not just the building that tells a story. The library's rare books collection is a treasure trove of history. The library at TU was the beneficiary of book collectors, particularly Clara Peck, a wealthy New York sportswoman. Her donations included a 2-volume edition of Hortus Sanitatis and a first edition of On the Origin of Species by Charles Darwin, as well as the original folios of The Birds of America by John James Audubon. The Audubon book volumes themselves consisted of 4 double-sized volumes measuring over 2.5 feet wide, full of immaculately detailed paintings by Audubon himself, and are worth an estimated $10 to $12 million. The full set of Birds of America weighs approximately 250 pounds. Before we get to today's heist, we must toast to rare books. We shall do so today with the Transylvania Twist, a beautiful cocktail that must be seen to be believed. It combines tangerine juice and Prosecco at the bottom of a champagne glass and vodka mixed with black food coloring floating along the top. I personally might do a little mixing before actually drinking, but I guess that's up to you. And while you're drinking, like, subscribe, and forward this episode along to a friend, would you? I know I said it twice. I want you to do it twice. And if you're on YouTube, send me a comment or 10. I respond to everyone who comments, and engagement helps me a lot. Thanks, cocktail conspirators. Betty Jean Gooch was the librarian who oversaw all of Clara Peck's collection and the others in the rare book room, and she had been working at TU for 10 years in 2004. She was known affectionately to her students and colleagues as BJ, but we're going to call her Betty Jean for obvious reasons. Spencer Reinhard and Warren Lipka were best friends and had been since age 8. They were kind of opposites. Warren was a popular jock and class clown, while Spencer was an overachiever that excelled at whatever he did. Their friendship circled around soccer. Although they went to different high schools, both were varsity soccer captains and earned all-state honors. After graduating from high school in 2003, Warren headed to the University of Kentucky, also in Lexington, on an athletic scholarship. Spencer, a talented artist, enrolled at TU on an arts scholarship. He would later say that as he grew up, he was always looking for some kind of life-changing experience, similar to other tortured artists that he aspired to be like, I guess. On his freshman orientation tour, Spencer visited the library and that rare books collection. He would tell Vanity Fair, quote, "And the woman there says, we had a set just like this that we sold 4 years ago for like $12 million. It could have been 8, I'm not sure, but it was a lot. It immediately had sparked my imagination like a fantasy," end quote. During the fall, Warren dropped off the soccer team and was enrolled by status only. Oh, and he got right to work breaking the law, selling fake IDs at $100 a pop to fellow U of K students, along with his buddy and roommate, Eric Borsick. That was a partnership that wasn't bound to sail, yet again, when Eric came up short $2,000 and thought maybe Warren had something to do with it. After Warren lost a criminal buddy, he reached out to his old friend Spencer. Spencer was an artist. Maybe he wanted to get in on the fake ID game himself. Spencer was also not doing so well in his freshman year, and he also, he wanted that experience. I don't really know how this just comes up in conversation, but at some point Spencer mentions to Warren that there are a lot of really old, expensive books in the TU library. And then somehow these guys decided this was going to be a good idea. Let's steal these old, rare books. So they started to formulate a plan. Spencer started his initial reconnaissance of the campus and the security at the library. He figured out the schedules of the librarians and other staff, as well as key days and times for the library itself. He figured out pretty quickly that the only security was Betty Jean, the librarian, and a visitor's book. I mean, probably because no one thought that people would just straight up steal a bunch of old books, but whatever. Warren looked for a way to sell the books, choosing wisely to have a buyer lined up before committing the theft. One of his friends put him in contact with a potential fence, known only as Barry, who handed Warren an email address on a piece of paper in a meeting in New York's Central Park near the Plaza Hotel. Warren contacted the email address and arranged a meeting with that potential fence in Amsterdam. Amazingly, that fence said that they would be interested in purchasing the books, but only on the condition that they were authenticated by a reputable auction house. One of Warren's friends put him in contact with a potential fence, and Warren met up with the unnamed contact near Central Park in New York City. The contact handed him an email address on a piece of paper and told him to just go by Terry in all future communications. The guys created a Yahoo account, and Warren, aka Terry, emailed back and forth with this random potential buyer until he was able to meet up with him in Amsterdam. Only Warren went because it was expensive. As they sat together in a cafe, miraculously, the fence said he would buy the books, but only after they were appraised and authenticated by a reputable auction house. Upon returning home from Amsterdam, Warren made up with his buddy from U of K, Eric, because he thought, well, the partnership didn't sail before, so let's try again. I don't know. They also recruited another buddy and roommate of Eric and Warren, Charles Chaz Allen, because that they realized the books they were going to steal were going to be really heavy and they needed some literal muscles. Remember, we're talking about more than 250 pounds worth of books. Also, how can you even keep a secret like this from your third roommate? What kind of friend and roommate would you even be? Spencer meticulously sketched the layout of the Special Collections Library and the Rare Book Room, setting up multiple meetings with Betty Jean to scope out the space. Meanwhile, the others were busy observing, tracking staff routines, mapping out possible escape routes, and even studying the campus police offices. They took their surveillance to the rooftops of dorms, spending hours watching the library's traffic. Professors, students, security, all logged in their notes. They also planned an escape route that would keep them from being seen as they brought their spoils out of the Rare Books Room. And when they weren't on site, they were online, researching everything from auction house appraisals to stun guns and Swiss bank accounts. Warren and Spencer also watched heist movies like Ocean's 11 and Thomas Crown Affair, because I guess they wanted to use fiction as the blueprint. The heisters bought some old man disguises, yes, this is real, and stun guns. Taking a page right out of Reservoir Dogs, Warren handed out color-coded aliases. Spencer was Mr. Green, Warren took Mr. Yellow, and Eric became Mr. Black. And just like in the movie, tensions flared when Chaz got stuck with Mr. Pink. Warren managed to make an appointment with Christie's. Yes, that Christie's in New York City as Walter Beckman. Not sure what happened to Terry. Spencer would say, quote, I was kind of skeptical, but the way I rationalized it was, it's the biggest auction house. If we go in there, they're not going to suspect that we stole these because no one would go to Christie's with stolen books to get them appraised. That's how we did a lot of stuff. Like, we would smoke weed directly under the security camera on the Transy campus, park a car right underneath it, and then smoke for like an hour. We figured the more obvious we were, the less likely we would be suspected. End quote. Warren, aka Walter, emailed from his walter.beckman@yahoo.com account and then called Betty Jean for an appointment in the rare books room of the TU library on December 16, 2004, the week before winter break. He said he was particularly interested in seeing the Audubon books. However, when December 16th rolled around, the planned getaway minivan became unavailable. Warren had also ordered stun guns, which, are you really just going to stun a librarian? Anyway, those hadn't arrived yet either. They did go to the library, but it was more crowded than they had anticipated, and those old man disguises weren't exactly believable. So they were sticking out like sore thumbs or like young dudes pretending to be old. So they abandoned their effort. Warren called the library and said that he had missed the appointment because of a business trip and rescheduled for the next day at 11 a.m. They decided to forego the disguises. Yeah. On the morning of December 17th, Spencer watched from the roof of a nearby building with a stolen cell phone that he used to call Warren. He couldn't be involved in the actual crime since he was a TU student, and that was too big of a risk, him being recognized. Chaz drove the getaway minivan. Warren signed the very secure visitor's book as Walter Beckman. He had a long, thin face, sideburns, and bleached blonde hair. He asked Betty Jean if his friend John, a very clever alias, I have to say, could join him, and Betty Jean agreed. John, short with dark hair, was actually Eric. I'm sure you're shocked. Eric and Warren were dressed similarly, both wearing large overcoats, backpacks, wool hats, and gloves. Betty Jean noted that Warren, aka Walter, appeared younger than she expected, and also he was more nervous. When Betty Jean, Warren, aka Walter, and Eric, aka John, got to the rare book room, one of the men closed the door behind them. As Betty Jean showed them some books, including the original folios of The Birds of America by Audubon, Warren actually did attack Betty Jean with a freaking stun gun. Using a stun gun on a poor, defenseless librarian, she collapsed. And he put a wool hat over her head, bound her with zip ties on both her hands and her feet, and gagged her. As he was threatening her and tying her up, one of the men threatened her, saying, quote, "Quit struggling, BJ, or do you want to feel more pain?" End quote. BJ? Strange. Warren and Eric tossed the Audubon books in a bedsheet, but they were heavier than they anticipated, so they only managed to snag 3. They scrambled around to put smaller books in backpacks and headed to an employee-only elevator. In their haste, they got out on the wrong floor and couldn't find an exit. This got the attention of the library director, Susan Brown. While the thieves had planned on only one librarian working that day, the school's final exam schedule meant that the library was full of both staff and students. I guess their vast, expansive planning wasn't quite good enough. Warren and Eric went back to the elevator, took it to the ground floor, and carried the bedsheet books to the stairwell that they hoped led to an exit. As they were in the stairwell, Susan discovered Betty Jean still tied up on the floor of the rare book room and took off after the thieves. The 2 men dropped the bedsheet books in the stairwell and ran out of the building to their getaway gray minivan with a temporary license plate, very classy, with Susan close behind. Once inside the minivan, Chaz sped down 4th Street, but not before Susan, crime fighter / librarian, spotted them and was able to see that there were 3 total heisters. While they hadn't been able to take the bedsheet Audubon books, their backpacks still held rare books worth $750,000, including the first edition Darwin, the 2-volume set of Hortus Sanitatis worth approximately $450,000, and several paintings and sketches by Audubon. Once the thieves were about a mile away from campus, Chaz panicked and kicked the other two out of the minivan, promising to come back soon with a new car to avoid suspicion after dropping the getaway minivan at his mom's house. The two got out of the getaway minivan, reluctantly, and continued walking away from the campus, which by now was full of police cars. After a few blocks, in a stroke of really bad or maybe really good luck, the thieves were chased again, this time by muggers who planned on stealing their wallets and bags. They ran several blocks, and by a stroke of really bad or maybe really good luck, came upon Chaz, who had just secured a new car, and they sped off. The four had planned their trip to New York City to authenticate the books at Christie's for the first weekend of winter break. They told their parents that they'd planned a ski trip in West Virginia. They piled into Eric's Ford Explorer on a half-baked plan, but fully baked in other ways. Road trip, yeah. At one point, a very high Spencer started reading aloud from their stolen first edition of On the Origin of Species, getting especially hung up on the part about how domesticated animals' ears droop over time, apparently because they don't have to stay on high alert for danger. They arrived to New York City and waltzed into Christie's, carrying their stolen books and their hastily crafted identities. Warren, aka Terry, aka Walter, was now going by Mr. Williams and was dressed in a blue suit and a red tie. He took the lead, while Spencer played the part of Mr. Stevens, wearing his grandfather's vintage yellow blazer and a gold scarf and white sneakers. Chaz and Eric waited around the corner in the SUV with the books. I have no idea why they didn't just bring the books inside. Who knows? Mr. Williams and Mr. Stevens had an appointment with Thomas Leckie, a well-known expert in rare books. But when they arrived, they were met instead by Melanie Holleran. She apologized. Thomas was tied up with an upcoming auction, but assured them that she could help. Not exactly keeping their cool, the two men stumbled through their story. They weren't just collectors. They were the exclusive representatives of a mysterious Boston book enthusiast named Walter Beckman, reclusive, wealthy, and conveniently unavailable for direct contact. Melanie listened carefully, taking notes as she asked questions about the book's provenance. Questions that the two could not answer. At some point, they went to get the books, which they brought inside in wheeled suitcases, and the books inside were wrapped in those bedsheets and pillowcases. My God. Melanie was suspicious, yeah. She wasn't rushing them out the door, but she wasn't biting either. After about 30 minutes, she wrapped up the conversation, telling them she'd consult with her colleagues on the best way forward. In reality, she recommended that they do nothing further with the weird kids with the weird story and the weirdly wrapped up books. Before leaving, the thieves handed over a phone number. That was unwise. But I'm guessing they really thought Christie's was just going to authenticate these books on site. And remember, they're like 18 years old. They're young. Of course, the investigation was immediately underway at TU. And you know that with a crime of this magnitude, the FBI is going to be involved. Things were slow going at first. There were very few witnesses, and the criminals had amazingly left no fingerprints. There was nothing in the boys' backgrounds that would have flagged them to authorities. A witness did manage to see the license plate, but they wrote down the wrong number. The first break came when the FBI was investigating Walter Beckman's email address, which they had used to email Betty Jean for that initial appointment. The FBI went to Yahoo, and Yahoo did not hesitate. When federal agents came knocking with their subpoena, the company handed over everything they had on the mysterious Walter Beckman email account. Meanwhile, the FBI sat down with Melanie from Christie's, which they also found from that email address, piecing together details from their meeting. That's when they got their hands on a physical description of Warren and Spencer and the phone number the thieves had left behind. It was registered to a man named Gary Reinhard from Lexington, Kentucky. But the real giveaway? The voicemail. Instead of a generic message, it played a recording. "This is Spence. Leave a message." That was all they needed. When police looked into Spencer's family, they found a photo of Spencer and Warren playing soccer on the front page of their local newspaper and were able to confirm the identities of both as the men who had gone into Christie's. From there, it was just a matter of time. They tracked the crew's movements, built their case, and on February 11th, 2005, law enforcement moved in. SWAT teams led coordinated strikes on Spencer's dorm room as well as the bungalow where Eric, Chaz, and Warren lived. All 4 men were arrested without incident, though Chaz initially thought the raid was a robbery and nearly pulled a gun on the agents until he realized what was happening. They found the stolen books in a duffel bag by his bed, undamaged, along with a painfully incriminating 5-page heist plan, an accounting ledger, wigs, Swiss bank account instructions, and stun guns. When faced with the sheer weight of it all, every single one of them confessed. On February 11th, 2005, less than 2 months after the crime, they all pled guilty to 6 federal charges, including theft of cultural artifacts from a museum and interstate transportation of federal property. The judge ruled they were all equally guilty, that the value of the theft should be of the books actually removed from the building, and that the stun gun used was a dangerous weapon. They were sentenced to 7 years each without parole. Spencer, Eric, and Warren served their sentences at the minimum security federal correctional institution in Ashland, Kentucky, 125 miles from Lexington. Chaz started his sentence there, but was then transferred to a federal medical center in Lexington. Betty Jean Gooch was left shaken by the whole ordeal. The raid, the investigation, it took a toll on her, leaving behind more than just bad memories. The psychological impact was real. But she did something unexpected. She forgave them. She retired in 2020 from TU. Eric, Warren, Spencer, and Chaz were all released in 2012. Spencer is now a working artist. Warren graduated from Temple University in 2018 with a master's degree in film studies. His linked bio describes him as a writer, storyteller, and prison reform advocate. Chaz, who describes himself as an author, screenwriter, and transformation coach on Twitter, has penned multiple autobiographical books about his role in the heist and his time in prison. Eric, also an author, wrote the 2018 book American Animals, a True Crime Memoir. I don't know how these guys can write books and profit off of their crime. I thought that was illegal, but I wouldn't buy them if I were you, and I did not. The crime has since been turned into a feature film, a docudrama of sorts, American Animals, which you can stream on Prime, and each of the 4 thieves served as consultants and provided interviews for the film. Many of their families were also interviewed for the documentary, and Betty Jean was as well. She would say the movie ended up being cathartic for her. I do recommend watching this film if this case has piqued your interest. TU increased the security in the special collections, but still allows people to see the famous, now returned books, including the Audubon folios. The TU book heist has been listed among the FBI's all-time most significant art theft cases, and they might have kept those books and stayed free forever from repercussions of this crime if they hadn't gone to Christie's. A Lexington police detective would tell Vanity Fair, quote, "The truth is, but for one obvious big mistake, they probably would have gotten away with it," end quote. Other than hurting Betty Jean, all 4 men say they have no regrets for what they did. Eric would say, quote, "We did the robbery as a way to escape. I think we all knew we wanted something different, and we had to break away from where we were living. If we got away with it, we'd be in Europe living this crazy life thinking we were Ocean's 11 types. If not, we were going to get caught, and it was going to be a crazy story," end quote. Thanks for hanging out with me. Whew. This is a wild one. I was definitely totally wrong about where Transylvania University was. It's pretty disappointing, actually. You can't be more disappointed than me, I assure you. I'm glad Betty Jean was able to move past this crime, and this serves as a good reminder that even though I'm covering more lighthearted crimes, that doesn't mean there aren't victims. The books may have been returned, but Betty Jean suffered a real lasting trauma. Not fun and games there. Next week, we're doing a case that's so short that the cocktail recipe has more ingredients than well, that makes sense. Not here, but it makes sense somewhere. In any case, the case itself might have a bit of a blue tinge to it. Not depressed necessarily, more disguised. I'll see you then. And remember, there are always alternatives to stun gunning a librarian. Jeez.